Jake stood at the edge of the woods, his breath forming visible puffs in the crisp morning air. It had been years since he had vanished, leaving behind the life, the home, and the family he thought he had built. Yet here she was, Emily, just a few steps away, her gaze locked onto his with a mix of determination and regret. His heart pounded as memories surged like an unstoppable tide. The woman who had unraveled his world was now the one trying to piece it back together. It took him a moment to steady himself before stepping closer. Her eyes shone with intensity, glistening in the light. Before we dive into Jake's tale of betrayal, disappearance, and the confrontation years in the making, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story has captured your interest, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the powerful stories we share. Jake fumbled with his keys as he unlocked the front door, the weight of the day bearing down heavily on him. The house greeted him with an eerie silence, one that seemed deafening in its emptiness. Stepping inside, he noticed the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air, a fragrance Emily had always loved. Usually, it comforted him, but tonight it felt oddly out of place. The gentle hum of the refrigerator was the only sound breaking the stillness. A dim light from a table lamp spilled across the living room, casting long, distorted shadows that danced along the walls. Jake placed his bag down with deliberate slowness, every movement made heavier by his exhaustion. Even the simplest tasks felt monumental. He moved toward the kitchen, intending to pour himself a drink, but something caught his attention out of the corner of his eye. His study door was slightly ajar. That was strange. He distinctly remembered shutting it before leaving for work. Pausing briefly, he felt the weight of the quiet grow oppressive. Pushing the door open, Jake stepped inside. His desk, usually cluttered with papers and notes, appeared untouched except for one thing, a manila folder lying dead center, as though purposefully placed. His brow furrowed as he approached it, his pulse quickening. Picking it up, the folder felt heavier than it should. The bold words, paternity test results, stared back at him in stark, clinical font. With trembling hands, he opened it, scanning the contents for meaning in the unfamiliar medical terms. Then his eyes landed on a single line that screamed at him. Probability of paternity, 0%. His stomach dropped. The world tilted as he reread the line, his mind struggling to process the implications. Josh isn't mine. The thought pierced through him like an icy dagger. His legs threatened to give way, but he gripped the edge of the desk to steady himself. Jake's breath hitched as a flood of memories overwhelmed him. Josh's first steps, his infectious laugh, the way he called him Dad with so much love and trust. Each recollection felt as though it was being cruelly unraveled, one thread at a time. His throat tightened and his vision blurred. No, he whispered, his voice barely audible. This can't be true. At that moment, his entire life felt like a cruel fabrication, but he knew there was more yet to uncover. Jake remained in the dim study, clutching the folder tightly. The silence around him was suffocating, broken only by his unsteady breaths. His thoughts raced as he pieced together fragments of the past 8 years with Emily. Her radiant smile flashed in his mind, a smile he had trusted completely, believing it held no secrets. Yet, there had been signs. Little things that didn't quite add up. Late nights at work. Vague explanations. That one argument about Josh's birth he had brushed aside too easily. Jake's fists clenched, crumpling the folder's edges. Was it all there, right in front of me? Was I just too blind to see it? He thought. He pictured Josh, his boy, the child he had cherished. But now, the idea of Josh not being his twisted his stomach with an unbearable weight. He remembered the first time he held Josh, his tiny hand wrapping around Jake's finger, as if to say, I trust you. He had made a promise that day to never let him down. But now he wasn't even sure what his role was in Josh's life. Was he a fraud? A placeholder? Emily's laugh, once the melody of his mornings, now felt like a cruel echo of deceit. Jake gritted his teeth, his nails digging into his palms. He had built his entire world around Emily and Josh, a world that now felt as fragile as glass, shattering with each painful memory. How could you do this, Emily? He muttered, his voice breaking. The question lingered in the air, unanswered, as the room seemed to close in around him. Somewhere deep within, a voice whispered, "You'll have to confront her. You need to know the truth, but can you handle it?" Jake's eyes dropped to the folder again. The bold lettering blurred as tears welled up. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly and completely lost. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, its warmth clashing against the storm brewing within Jake. Standing in the doorway, he clutched the manila folder tightly. Emily was at the stove, humming softly as she flipped pancakes, blissfully unaware of the upheaval about to unfold. Without a word, Jake strode to the table and slammed the folder down. The sharp sound cut through the room like a gunshot. Emily froze, the spatula hovering midair. Slowly, she turned to face him, her expression a mix of confusion and worry. "What's this?" she asked, her voice tentative. Jake's chest heaved. "Why don't you tell me?" Emily's gaze darted to the folder, her hands trembling as she wiped them on a dish towel. "Jake, I don't understand." "Don't lie to me, Emily," he snapped, his voice cracking with raw anger and pain. He shoved the folder toward her. "Open it." Hesitating, her face paled as she flipped the folder open. Her reaction was immediate. A sharp intake of breath, followed by a stammered denial. This isn't right. It must be a mistake." Jake let out a bitter laugh, devoid of humor. "A mistake? That's your excuse? A mistake?" Emily stepped closer, reaching out to him, but he recoiled. "Jake, please. It happened before we were married. I didn't think it mattered. You've always been Josh's father." Jake shook his head, disbelief etched across his face. "You didn't think it mattered? You didn't think I mattered? You let me believe. No, you let me build my entire life around a lie." His voice grew louder with each word, his composure unraveling. Tears streamed down Emily's face. "I was scared. I thought if you knew, you wouldn't marry me. I didn't want to lose you." Jake slammed his fist onto the table, causing her to flinch. "You stole my choice, Emily. You stole my right to know. Don't you dare make this about your fear." Her sobs intensified, her voice trembling. "It doesn't change anything, Jake. You've been his father in every way that matters. Biology doesn't change that." Jake's vision blurred with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Words caught in his throat, choking him. Turning away, he gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. "I can't even look at you right now," he muttered. The room spun, the weight of her betrayal suffocating him. Later, sitting alone in his car, Jake's chest felt hollow. The manila folder lay crumpled on the seat beside him, its contents burned into his mind. Gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles turned white as he struggled to steady himself. Finally, he shifted into gear and drove off, the streets a blur as he sought refuge in his old apartment. Jake figured it was over and tried to move on, but David's words hung in the air, each one driving the knife deeper into Jake's chest. He studied David, searching for any trace of deceit, but found none. David was just another casualty of Emily's lies. For a moment, neither man spoke, the silence heavy with shared betrayal. Then David broke it, his voice softer, almost apologetic. "Look, I can't imagine what you're dealing with, but I had no idea. I don't want any part of this. I've got my own life now." Jake's throat tightened as he stood. "I don't need you to be involved. This isn't about you. It's about me, my son, and the woman who tore my life apart." David nodded, his expression resigned. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For both of us." Jake turned to leave, the weight of the conversation heavy on his shoulders. Just as he reached the door, David's voice stopped him. "If she lied about me, what else is she hiding?" The words hit Jake like a punch, echoing in his mind as he stepped out into the cold air. The chill did little to calm the storm raging inside him. If Emily could deceive him for 12 years, what other secrets had she kept? The question followed him relentlessly as he drove away. Jake parked outside Sarah's house, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. The drive had been a blur, his mind circling around David's parting words. If she lied about me, what else is she hiding? Now, here he was, standing at the door of the one person who might have answers. The sound of his knuckles rapping on the door seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet suburban street. Moments later, Sarah opened the door, her face lighting up with surprise before shifting to concern. "Jake?" she asked hesitantly, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to see Emily. "Is everything okay?" He wasted no time. I need to talk to you, he said firmly. About Emily. Sarah's expression tightened. This doesn't feel like a conversation to have at the door. Come in. Inside, the house was warm, carrying the faint aroma of cinnamon. The cozy atmosphere might have comforted Jake once, but now it only churned his stomach. He followed Sarah into the living room and sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly. I found out about David, Jake said, his words clipped. Sarah's face paled and her gaze dropped. That was all the confirmation Jake needed. You knew, didn't you? He demanded. Sarah sighed heavily, sitting across from him. Jake, it's not what you think. Don't. He cut her off, his voice rising. Don't try to spin this. Just tell me the truth. Did you know? She hesitated, guilt filling her eyes. I suspected, she admitted softly. Years ago, before you and Emily got married, she told me about a fling she'd had. She was a mess about it. Guilty, scared. I thought she'd tell you. You thought? Jake snapped, leaning forward. You thought she'd tell me. You didn't think I deserved to know. Sarah's voice trembled. I didn't think it would come to this. She swore it was over, that it didn't mean anything. Then you two got married, and I didn't want to ruin that for you. Jake shot to his feet, pacing as his anger boiled over. So you let me live a lie? 12 years, Sarah. 12 years of my life built on nothing but lies, and you knew? Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. I didn't know Josh wasn't yours, Jake. I swear. I thought it was over before you met her. I didn't think. You didn't think, he interrupted bitterly. Of course you didn't. Because if you had, maybe I wouldn't be here now, trying to pick up the pieces of a life I don't even recognize. The room fell into suffocating silence. Sarah wiped her eyes, her guilt apparent. I'm sorry, Jake, she whispered. I should have said something. I didn't know how. Jake stopped pacing, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was low and hoarse. Did anyone else know? Does anyone else know the truth about my family? About my son? No, Sarah said quickly. I'm the only one she told. I swear I never told anyone else. Jake turned to face her, his eyes burning with betrayal. So I'm the last to know. The husband, the father, the fool. You're not a fool, Jake, Sarah said desperately. You're a good man, a good father. Nothing about that has changed. Her words rang hollow. Jake's mind swirled with questions, each one cutting deeper than the last. Had his entire marriage been a sham? Had he been the only one who truly believed in their life together? I can't do this, he muttered, moving toward the door. Sarah stood, following him. Jake, wait, please, don't blame Josh for this. He's innocent in all of it. Jake paused, his hand on the doorknob, his jaw tightening. I know he is, but Emily, she's not. Without another word, he stepped outside. The cold air stung his face, but it did nothing to clear the chaos inside him. The truth Sarah had revealed didn't bring clarity. It only added another layer to the betrayal. Jake climbed into his car, gripping the wheel as he stared blankly at the road ahead. If she lied to me once, she could lie again. What else don't I know? The question sat heavy in his chest, an unrelenting weight as he drove away. Jake's voice was firm, his tone devoid of emotion. I don't want to hear any more excuses, he said flatly. You've said enough. Emily turned to face him, tears pooling in her eyes. It's not an excuse, she said, her voice trembling. It's the truth. The real truth. Jake scoffed, crossing his arms. The real truth, like the one you told me 12 years ago, or the one in that folder. His voice was sharp, cutting through the fragile silence. Emily flinched but held her ground. I lied, she admitted, her voice cracking. But not the way you think. Jake, David isn't Josh's father. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He stared at her, struggling to process what she had just said. What the hell are you talking about? Emily stepped closer, her hands trembling. I faked the test. I made it say you weren't his father. Jake's jaw tightened, his voice rising with anger. You lied again? After everything? He turned away, running a hand through his hair as his chest heaved. Why? What possible reason could you have for doing something so cruel? Tears streamed down Emily's face as she spoke, her voice desperate. Because I knew I didn't deserve you. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd leave me anyway. I was scared, Jake. Scared that one day you'd realize I wasn't good enough for you. Jake turned back to her, his eyes blazing with fury. So you decided to destroy my life instead? You thought this was better? You didn't just betray me, Emily. You betrayed Josh. You turned our lives into a lie. Emily collapsed into a chair, her shoulders shaking as sobs racked her body. I know, she whispered. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve to be here right now, but I couldn't let you believe it anymore. You're Josh's father, Jake. You always have been. Every part of him. It's you. The room fell silent, her confession settling over them like a heavy fog. Jake's anger burned brightly, but beneath it, confusion and exhaustion pulled at him. He sank into the chair across from her, his voice quieter but no less sharp. Why now, Emily? Why tell me this after everything? Emily looked at him, her tear-streaked face full of anguish. Because I can't keep living like this. I can't keep running from the truth. I know it's too late for us, Jake, but it's not too late for you and Josh. He loves you. He needs you. Jake leaned back, his head resting against the wall as he closed his eyes. His mind reeled, caught between fury and heartbreak. You didn't just take away my trust, Emily. You took away my choices, my chance to be angry, my chance to understand. You decided for me. I know, she whispered, her voice hollow. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. The silence stretched on, heavy and unrelenting. Jake finally opened his eyes, staring at the folder in his hands. It felt meaningless now, just a collection of lies stacked on top of more lies. If you really wanted to protect me, he said finally, his voice edged with steel, you should have trusted me with the truth. But you didn't. And I don't know if I'll ever forgive you for that. Emily nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I'll leave now, she said softly, standing. I needed you to know. Jake didn't respond. He remained rooted in his chair, his eyes fixed on the folder, as the door closed behind her. The apartment was silent once more, but the quiet felt heavier now, burdened with a new kind of pain. If she could lie to me about this, what else has been a lie? The thought lingered, relentless and unyielding, as Jake sat in the dim light of his shattered reality. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting golden streaks across the living room floor. Jake stood in the kitchen, cracking eggs into a bowl. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sizzling bacon on the stove. For the first time in weeks, the house felt alive again. Josh bounded into the room, still in his pajamas, his hair a messy halo of curls. What's for breakfast, Dad? He asked, his voice bright and full of anticipation. Jake turned to him with a smile that came a little easier now. Eggs, bacon, and pancakes. Think you can help me flip the pancakes? Josh grinned, dragging a chair over to the counter. I'm the pancake master, remember? Jake chuckled, handing him the spatula. That's right. Let's see if you've still got it. Later that afternoon, the two of them were in the backyard with a basketball between them. The court was cracked, weeds pushing through the edges. But to Josh, it didn't matter. First 1 to 5 wins, Josh announced, dribbling the ball with exaggerated focus. All right, but don't cry when I crush you, Jake teased, crouching slightly as he prepared to block him. Josh darted to the left, his small frame slipping past Jake's half-hearted defense. He shot the ball, and it arched through the air before swishing through the net. Yes, Josh shouted, throwing his arms up in triumph. Jake laughed, grabbing the ball and tossing it back to him. All right, champ, let's see if you can do it again. As the game continued, Jake marveled at the simple joy of the moment. The anger and pain that had consumed him just days before felt distant now, replaced by something softer, steadier. The sound of Josh's laughter filled the yard, pushing back the silence that had haunted Jake since he left their home. That evening, they stood side by side in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Josh wrinkled his nose at the onions. Why do onions have to be in everything? Because they make everything better, Jake replied with a smirk. Besides, aren't you the one who said you'd try anything once? Josh rolled his eyes, but added the onions to the pan. Fine, but I'm still not eating Brussels sprouts. Jake feigned shock. Brussels sprouts are the best part. What kind of heathen am I raising? Josh burst out laughing, the sound bright and unrestrained. Jake couldn't help but laugh along, the warmth of the moment filling the room. As the days turned into weeks, their routines grew more familiar, more natural. Jake woke up earlier, eager to start the day with Josh. They tackled homework together, played board games on rainy afternoons, and spent evenings watching old movies on the couch. Each moment felt like a step forward, a piece of their bond repaired. One night, after tucking Josh into bed, Jake sat in the hallway for a moment, just listening to his son breathe. The small rise and fall of Josh's chest reminded him of what truly mattered. The doubts and anger that had plagued him began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination. He couldn't change the past, but he could make the present count, for Josh and for himself. On a warm Saturday, they decided to build a treehouse in the backyard. Jake hadn't picked up a hammer in years, but Josh's excitement was contagious. They spent hours sketching plans, sawing wood, and hammering nails. By sunset, they had the frame of a small but sturdy hideout nestled in the branches. Josh climbed the ladder they had attached to the trunk, peeking inside the unfinished treehouse. "This is going to be awesome," he said, his face glowing with excitement. Jake stood below, looking up at his son with a genuine smile. "It already is." The house felt different now, warmer, fuller, alive. The spaces that once suffocated with silence were now filled with laughter, the hum of life returning. Jake knew they still had a long way to go, but each shared moment, each smile, each laugh was a reminder that they were rebuilding something stronger. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight, Josh leaned his head against Jake's arm. "I'm glad you're here, Dad." Jake swallowed the lump in his throat and rested a hand on Josh's shoulder. "Me too, buddy. Me too." The weight of her words settled over him. "You didn't trust me," he said, though it sounded more like he was speaking to himself than to her. "I didn't trust anyone," she admitted quietly. "Not even myself." The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different, less oppressive, more thoughtful. Jake studied her, the woman he had once loved so deeply. He saw her now in a new light. She wasn't just the person who had caused him pain. She was someone who had been carrying her own pain for far longer than he had realized. "I wish you told me," he said at last, his voice tinged with regret. "Maybe we could have figured it out together." Emily offered a faint smile. "Maybe. But I think some things needed to happen the way they did. For you, for Josh, even for me." Jake turned his gaze to the window, his thoughts tumbling over one another. He thought about Josh, now a teenager flourishing in ways neither of them could have imagined. He thought about the love they had shared, imperfect but genuine, and the lessons he had learned through the pain. "Do you hate me?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Jake looked back at her, his expression soft. "No," he said. "I did for a while, but not anymore. I don't think I ever really could." Her tears spilled over, and Jake reached out to take her fragile hand in his. They sat like that for a long time, the years of anger and hurt slowly giving way to something gentler, something close to peace. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the room, Jake spoke again, his tone steady and reflective. "Life isn't about the lies we tell or the mistakes we make," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "It's about the love we leave behind." Emily's hand tightened slightly around his, a faint smile gracing her lips. "Then maybe I did something right." Jake nodded, his heart full of bittersweet understanding. They couldn't change the past, but in that moment they found something even more profound: forgiveness. Jake's journey was one of heartbreak, resilience, and ultimately forgiveness. It makes us wonder, what would you do in his shoes? Would you have the strength to forgive, or would the pain of betrayal be too overwhelming? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters. If this story resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who might find inspiration or reflection in Jake's experience. And if you're looking for more stories that delve into life's complexities, don't forget to subscribe. There's so much more to explore together.